like that. But like I said, we'll have lots of time for questions and answers, and I'm really excited for you all to be here. And I'm just going to give you a couple pieces of business. So Marty or Martha Ryan Severens, class of 67, is an art historian and museum curator, and she will discuss how two artists use the American flag to identify I'm having a hard time with my words tonight, personages and the attitudes, and how Jasper Johns attaches little symbolism to his many renditions of the flag. If you have any questions, like I said, I'll put it in the chat as well, but you can always call us at the office at Pettibone at 315-364-3200 or email alumoffice@wells.edu. It will be about a 40-minute presentation and then lots of time for Q&A. And I'm also going to read our Cayuga land acknowledgement from our college. And we say this at our presentations and our situations that we do on campus. So I like to do it online as well. Wells College recognizes our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. This land is the traditional land of the Cayuga Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Wells College commits itself to ensure the traditions and culture of Indigenous peoples are embraced and reflected upon in order to engage in solidarity with the Cayuga Nation. Approved by the Wells College faculty May 9th, 2018. Pardon my stuttering tonight. I have a hard time at night with words. All right, we are ready to get this started, and Marty is going to take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. And when I make a few introductory comments, I want you to study this painting while I do that. Rachel, thank you for your patience, and Randy Kissel, thank you for overseeing this great program. And it's nice to see many familiar names and faces. So all of the artists, the three artists that we're going to look at tonight, are artists that I'm familiar with because I worked with these works while I was the curator at the Greenville County Museum of Art here in Greenville, South Carolina. I've not done this presentation before, but as you will find out, I've thought a lot about these particular artists. And we're starting with one of my favorite paintings because it's a painting that most people can respond to because it's easy to read. So I wonder if you have yet recognized the lady in the center, the one wearing the flag, and wonder what sort of identity you've come up with for her. She's not only wearing the American flag, but she's wearing this cute little red hat, which is known as a Liberty cap. And she's holding in her left hand this rather curious instrument, which is called a fasces. So I'll show you the three symbols that help us identify her. Flag from 1853, which would be more or less contemporary with the painting. The Phrygian or Liberty cap was made popular at the time of the French Revolution, and that's one of the reasons why the French use it on one of their stamps on a regular basis. And the fasces there gives you the sense that it was an ancient Roman instrument that consisted of several individual rods that were tied together. And that symbolizes e pluribus unum. So the painting is dependent on a lot of symbols. That's why I think it's fun to try and read them. You'll also notice at the foot of this figure wearing the red hat and the flag and holding the fasces, a cornucopia, which speaks to the whole idea of abundance, a very fertile land. So I think it's safe to say that here we have a personification of liberty. So Who's the woman on the left? Again, we can kind of deconstruct her. If you look in the background behind her, it should be quite obvious that there is a cotton field with a border of tobacco leaves and a peach tree. There are also two black laborers, an indication, I think, of slavery. So just taking that vignette alone, I think one might be able to conclude fairly easily that she is a personification of the South. Furthermore, as we all know, it's hot down here, so maybe that explains why she has this kind of décolletage. If you look, she's resting her left elbow on a bale of cotton. So, another one of the associations that we all have with the South. There is a monogram, LT/58. That's a kind of hidden signature for the artist himself, Luther Terry, and the date of the painting, 1858. So that's going to give you a little bit of additional context knowing when this was done. How about the woman on the right? She is more primly dressed. And if we take the idea of the South on one side, then it's only natural to think that this woman is a representation of the North. It's colder up there, right? As we know from our years on Lake Cayuga. I've given you the benefit of the title of this oversized volume that she holds. It's called The Useful Arts and Sciences. I tried to track down whether that really was a real book, unsuccessfully, but I think the title is an indication of the kind of practicality of Northerners, of New Englanders. And if you look behind her, there is the image of what might be a typical New England town, a little white church with its steeple, and in front of that, maybe ambiguously, three brick buildings that could be interpreted either as college buildings, maybe, or more than likely as factories. The tree with its great roots probably is an oak tree, and she also rests her foot on a rock. And I've often wondered if that isn't a reference to Plymouth Rock. So if we add all of these things together, we have what is an allegory of the North and South, painted by Luther Terry in 1858. I think the message here is quite clear, and if you look at it visually, reading it from left to right, there is this kind of rhythm of drapery that moves throughout the painting. And I think the message is that the cotton that is grown in the South has to be milled into textiles in the North. And I think the message is the interdependence, the interconnectedness of the two regions of this country. This, as you know, 1858 is a pre-Civil War image. And we have this curious gesture of Lady Liberty. She seems to put her arm a little bit around the personification of the South and putting her hand out. It's a gesture that is often associated with Christ's blessing, or one could interpret it as, maybe putting something off. And maybe if you look at her face, maybe she's looking a little apprehensive, as if she sees the unrest that is looming on the horizon, sort of off screen to our left. What's kind of fascinating is that Luther Terry, our artist, was painted this in Italy. He was an expatriate, took up residence in Rome, and why he painted this painting, we don't know. I would love to know if he had a particular patron, maybe a patron in the textile industry in the North. I was never able to figure that one out. What I do like about this painting, if you look at the physiognomy of the North and the South is dark-haired and dark-eyed, not unlike Southern Italians in the Mezzogiorno, and North is a little more fair-haired and fair-eyed, as Northern Italians tend to be. Now, it just so happens in the 1850s, Italy too was going through a nationalistic movement of kind of unification. Up until now, Italy had been divided up into various papal states and duchies and kingdoms, and was not a unified country. So I think we add all of these together, these symbols, the personifications, and we have a plea, as it were, all the way from Rome, for some unknown reason, that the two sides get their act together, as it were, and realize that their interdependence. So the flag is obviously central to our interpretation of this. I've tried to count the stars, but without much success. So moving along in time, a rather big jump, in fact, all the way to 1940, I want to introduce you to this image by William H. Johnson. Johnson is often described as a member of the Harlem Renaissance. It would be in the later years, 1940 is pretty late for the Harlem Renaissance, but he was active in Harlem after 1938. He was African American, born in Florence, South Carolina in 1901. He had spent many years, 12, basically being an expatriate in Europe, but because he was living in Denmark with a white textile artist, and with the rise of Nazism, he decided the better part of valor was for them to come back to the United States, and they settled in New York. So he is reflecting the Harlem Renaissance in this image with its depiction of figures, children and the preacher, or the choir leader, however you want to describe him, clearly derived from African models, because the Harlem Renaissance leaders, the theoreticians, the movers and shakers, were calling upon artists to search out their roots, not imitate their white or European forebears. So I think we have a wonderful image here of what the Harlem Renaissance was looking for and driving, really what their agenda was. Here we have the flag in a rather unusual position. It's upside down. What might that mean? Well, if you know your nautical history, if you're out on the bay or the ocean, and you are in trouble and you need to send an SOS visually, you might fly your flag upside down. And I think that is what William H. Johnson is getting at the troubled condition of his people at the time of 1940. This idea is reinforced somewhat by one other image with the soldiers. These are recruits in a drill, middle of World War II, clearly with the flags flying proudly, the soldiers lined up, dutifully being drilled by their drill sergeant. In the background, you see the Purple Mountain Majesty. I think what Johnson is getting at here is the loyalty of African American troops. There were something like 1 million of them who signed up and served during World War II. Interestingly enough, they were not allowed into combat until the final months of the war. And of course, they were in segregated battalions. They were not integrated, and so they were clearly discriminated against. So I think the point of this painting by Johnson is not that it's an SOS, but it is that here the troops were about to fight for a freedom that they did not have. This idea of freedom fighters is also shown on the right-hand side with the image of Harriet Tubman. And a few of us tonight had the privilege of participating in the in-person Learning by the Lake that took place after a reunion, and we heard a wonderful presentation about Harriet Tubman, who was being celebrated this summer because of the 200th anniversary of her birth. And the presentation took place in Auburn, where she spent her final years. The image shows her with a red and white striped skirt. It's not quite a flag, but I think there is the implication of a flag. And also visually, if you look at it, it's the design is almost as if she's standing in the middle of a railroad track as a reference to the Underground Railroad, in which she was so very active. And of course, there's the North Star behind her, which is what guided her as she fought for the freedom of many peoples as she helped them to find freedom. So we have Johnson having a particular attitude in his use of the flags. He was making a point about the role of African Americans, the position of them in the middle of the 20th century. The flag as a distress symbol, the flag as a patriotic symbol, but not the freedom that he felt his people were entitled to. So that's two artists and using the symbol of the flag. Our third artist does not use symbolism at all. In fact, he when he was asked why he rendered this flag in 1955, he was a mere 25-year-old. This was a revolutionary image at the time because this was the heyday of abstract expressionism. This is when Jackson Pollock was flinging paint across the canvases on a mega scale, and also William de Kooning. So for this young man from South Carolina to paint, have the audacity to paint an American flag was pretty startling. So when he was asked why did he do it, Jasper Johns, in his typical inscrutable fashion, said, "Well, I dreamt I painted the American flag, so the next morning I got up and painted the American flag." And of course, if you look at this particular image, it's more than just a painting of the American flag. It combines several different materials, in fact. There is newspaper print collaged underneath. There is encaustic, which is a specific technique in which paint is suspended in melted wax, and there's oil. So it's like the abstract expressionist in terms of it being very tactile and also experimental in terms of technique. Yet the image is anything but the image of the abstract expressionist. So this sort of startled the world of art in the mid-1950s. Jasper Johns has a mantra, and that is something that has sort of guided his career throughout his life. And that is take an object, do something to it, do something else to it. So he takes the American flag. I think he's done over 40 different versions. I don't know if that number is accurate, but he's done it over and over again. In this case, he's layered 3 different canvases of the flag, one over the other, over the other. And on the right-hand side, you can see a side view so you can see the dimensionality of the 3 flags. So he took the object, did something to it, and did something else to it. I think the other kind of comment in his typical obtuse way, he said, things the mind already knows. We know them, but we don't look at them. In other words, this is such a familiar object. So in a way, he's trying to shake us up, to get us to look at the flag by layering it in this kind of unconventional way, or collaging it with encaustic and newspaper. So he's kind of facing us to confront a flag that we see everywhere. And today, for instance, I was on a walk and I saw a flag hanging on somebody's porch, and I thought, there it is, you know, it's kind of ubiquitous. So ubiquitous that Jasper Johns went on to take the object and do something to it and do something else to it. And so these are 2 other versions, and I hope you've noticed the big difference that these 2 have, not just color, not just in their duality, but there has been a major shift. So I'll go back. This is the flag of 48 states, right? And this is the flag for 50 states. So these are post 1959, which is when Alaska and Hawaii were entered into the United States. So the image on the left is an exact contrast counter to the representation of the flag. So where we normally have white stripes, they're black, and where we normally have red, we have the complement, which is green. That's the color that is opposite red on the color wheel. And in the same way, we have black stars where they're normally white, and an orange background, which is the complement to blue. So he has reversed these colors. It's said, and I don't think you can do it with this image on the screen, but if you stand in front of this image and stare at it long enough, then, and you look to the one side or the other, and on a blank white wall, your eyes will see the opposite colors. Your eyes will self-correct. Jasper Johns is very interested in visual perception, how we see things, and making us look again. And in the same way, I think the 2 flags on the right, which is a silk screen, a very elaborate silk screen, which involved something like 31 different screens, which technically is very ambitious. And he's treated these 2 flags that one might assume are identical, but if you look closely, you'll notice that they're not. And there are in both the stars and in the stripes hints of the complementary colors. So you've got orange in the blue of the stars, and you've got hints of green in the red stripes. Now, I have stood before this particular silkscreen many times, and people want to make a great issue of how on the lower right-hand corner the flag seems to be kind of tattered and falling apart. I don't think that's at all what Jasper Johns meant. I don't think that's what he was after at all. The flag has become indelibly associated with him, so much so that during a period in the early 1980s, he did a series of quasi self-portraits. He just turned into the 50s. He was in his early 50s, and he did a series called The Seasons, summer, fall, winter, spring. The figure is his shadow. The image on the lower right is kind of the image of a clock, like he's marking time. There's this ladder and rope image that has to do with moving. At the time in the early 1980s, he was moving his household and his studio. And so he's piled up a lot of the artwork associated with his career up to that point, including an image of the Mona Lisa, which he had incorporated into a couple of his prints, and of course the flag. And you see it's the double flag. And also the background relates to a series he did. And these mugs or jugs are part of his collection of pottery that he owned. So he clearly is identifying himself with the flag. And he does this in one terrifically fun image, I think. This is an image that, again, has to do with perception. You can see the vase, which is this white shape in the lower part of the image. Or you can see, if you work hard enough, you can see several profiles. And as we read them from left to right, it seems that the one with the stripes, the red and white stripes, is a profile of George Washington. The next one is a profile of the man he really admired to a great extent, the great Dada artist Marcel Duchamp, and then his own profile there, just barely edging on the right. So Jasper Johns has sort of made the American flag almost his own, and using it over 40 times, as I've said. It's become indelibly associated with him. So, not to land on a rather corny note, I'm interested if you have any questions. I see there's only one comment in the chat, but I hope we will come up with some more. Questions? You'll have to go into the chat. I think Rachel's going to monitor that, but you can also open it up for discussion as far as I'm concerned. No questions?
I don't believe this. This is Wells people. Come on. I had a question and then I think you answered it, but I guess, well, can you tell me a little bit about what oh, and Randy's got a question too. I just want to hear a little bit about what interested you in this topic for tonight. And then Randy is going to ask, oh, and we've got lots of questions coming in. Okay. And you're welcome to type in and speak it aloud, or I can help with the questions. So yeah, Marty, if you want to say like what I said, what brought you here, and then we've got several questions.
Sure. Okay. Well, it doesn't have to do with patriotism, obviously, and doesn't really have much to do with history. It really has to do with that first painting, which I really love. And I had the great opportunity of standing in front of that painting, two memorable groups. One was a group of from the Greenville Literacy, and I was getting them. These are people from Hispanic, Mexico, Colombia, Vietnam, Iran, all over, and they were learning English as their second language. And so we were working with words, and so they could recognize things in that painting. The second experience I have, which was memorable, was a delegation from our sister city, Bergamo in Italy. And what they liked was the whole association with the Italian looking women, especially south with her décolletage, of course. I think Barb Snap had a question.
Yeah, and actually that last comment you just made in a way speaks to it, because I was going to say the three women in that first painting are very similar in their appearance, in their facial structure and coloring and their eyes. And I mean, they could be three sisters. And I don't know whether that is also part of maybe what he was trying to point out, that there isn't that much difference between the North and the South, and liberty is what connects us. I don't know.
I would agree. I think there is an interconnectedness, a sisterliness. And actually, Liberty looks more like the South than she does the North. So, and whether that gesture is one of embrace, is she pro-South? It's hard to know. Luther Terry himself was from Connecticut, from Windsor, Connecticut, which, interestingly enough, was a textile town. And also they manufactured guns. So he was not a Southerner by birth. So did Randy have a question?
Yes, Marty. My question is, where are the originals of the paintings you discussed this evening? If you happen to know, or where they can be viewed? Well,
the Luther Terry belongs to the Greenville County Museum of Art. The William H. Johnson with the upside down flag belongs to the Greenville County Museum of Art, though there's a version at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And the other two Johnson pieces are at the Smithsonian, and part of his Freedom series. The Jasper Johns flag belongs to either MoMA, and the three flags, the three dimensions, belongs to the Whitney. I get confused which is which. And then the green and double flags are silk screens. So there'll be many different versions, and the self-portrait with a shadow, I'm not sure where it is, but
that's fair. Yeah. If I could also, Luther Terry, the painter, the first painting, 1858 is just 3 years before the Civil War. Obviously, the division between the North and the South was a hot topic in the 1850s. Do you know what his reaction was to the war? Did he ever return from Italy after the war, or to the United States at any point?
Unfortunately, we know very little about him except where he was born. He never came back to this country. We don't know, except by reading this painting. We really don't know what his political, inclinations were. And I only know of one or two other paintings he painted, a Romeo and Juliet painting, which doesn't have any political underpinnings to it at all. So he's a mystery. I'd love to know more, but maybe someday. Maybe somebody here will have some letters or something hidden in their attic. So.
Well, he doesn't show his hand in that that picture is fairly even-handed in my view, north versus south. It's just
Okay.
plain. So
He studied in Florence. Does anybody know if the Accademia del Bell'Arti is still around? Maybe some of his stuff is still over there.
Could be. That's a good suggestion, Fran. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe with the group that's going to Florence next month could do a little hunting around for
check it out for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
He actually was in Rome. I forget the palazzo, but he had a floor in a Italian palazzo near the Piazza Barberini. That's trivia.
Okie doke.
What about Karen had a question as well. She says, I'm intrigued by the double suns in one of the paintings.
It was the one of Harriet Tubman, I believe.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Karen.
It looked like a rising and a setting sun. I don't know, but I noticed these two orange tabs of an orange on the horizon, and I finally figured, oh, they look like they're against the sky. They must be suns.
I agree. I think they're suns and maybe rising and setting, you know.
That's what yeah. Any idea what that's about?
No.
No,
Well, she did most of her work between the rising and the setting of the sun.
that could be. That could be. Or well, actually, she did a lot over the cover of Darkness too.
Right,
Well, that's
yeah.
what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, she did.
Between the setting
North
sun and the
Star.
rising sun,
Right.
Mhm,
she was busy.
Yeah, she was on that railroad track. I like
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah.
that. I like that.
And the North Star is in between the two.
Also, Marty, appears in the Harriet Tubman
Would be.
painting. There is a separate portrait of her in the lower right-hand corner. I'm wondering why the artist felt a need to add that. I thought the portrait of her standing was perfectly adequate the way it is, but this facial portrait of her was added.
I can't explain that. In the blurb from the Smithsonian, they point out that that is a replica of a late engraving of her, for what that's worth. But I don't know why there would have been the double portrait. To be perfectly honest, the late work of William H. Johnson, this was in the 1940s, gets kind of weird. He actually in 1945-46 was institutionalized in a mental facility on Long Island, and he lived there from 46 to 1970, not making any art, but he was kind of like creating different kinds of images.